Hi guys, today I'm going to show you how to draw hands, how to simplify them, and how to stylize them. There is just so much information that you can portray with your hands in the paintings that you create. So there's a lot to be had from learning how to draw them in a style that you really enjoy and are excited about. So to start off, really the most important thing to drawing anything is to know what it actually looks like. No matter how stylized you want to draw pretty much anything, you should always use reference to know what it actually looks like. So right here at the beginning, I have some references that I took of my own hands, and I'm using just some blue and red lines to break down the basic shape. So usually this is how I like to think about hands when I'm actually drawing them. So I break it down by the palm area, which I'm drawing in blue, and then the fingers is a secondary thing. So that really does help, just having an attack plan on how you like to draw your hands, starting from the base, the palm, moving outward to the fingers. I also like to have a certain progression of which fingers I draw first. So I usually end up drawing the finger that's closest to the viewer first, because you can see usually, of course it all depends on the actual pose and the props that are in the piece, but usually you can see that finger in the fullest, and then as the fingers recede into the background, you see less and less of the fingers because they're overlapped. So I find it easiest to draw that first finger that you can see all of it, and then you can start fitting in the other fingers on how they actually fall within that first finger. So you can look for landmarks, like where is the knuckles of the next finger, where does it line up with the knuckles of the first finger. So I think probably the second most important thing that I focus on when I'm drawing hands is I start to figure out where there are convex and concave lines. So concave is where it bows inward like a cave, and convex is where it bows outward. And really this has been a game changer for me as far as analyzing hands and figuring out how to get that flow that they have. It's just so helpful to be able to look at a hand and say, okay, this part right here, it's a convex shape, so I really want to exaggerate that. And this other section is concave, so I want to really bow that one in. And it's all just a give and take of exaggeration. I like to exaggerate them even more than you see in the references. I like to really give a lot of curve to it. That way it has a lot more movement and almost edginess to it, if that makes sense. And that just allows it so that it looks like there's more energy there to it, especially when everything else in my piece is a lot more stylized. Being able to stylize that curvature in each line work, it really helps a lot. So I find that a lot of times, and of course this can depend on exactly the way that a hand is wrapped around itself or holding props or anything like that, but a lot of times I find that the tops of the hands tend to be a little bit more concave, and I like to really exaggerate that, and then they peak up at the knuckles and then concave down in between them. And then on the bottom of the fingers, like the pads, that's where you find more convex shapes, where you have the tips of the fingers, and in between the knuckles, I like to exaggerate that even more so that there's this like very nice waving flow to the fingers where one connects and then the other flows off from it. So yes, I highly suggest looking at hands and studying them and looking and exaggerating where you see those convex and concave shapes. And then the next thing that I start adding in and focusing on are the details. So you can go anywhere on a range from hyper realistic to extremely simplified. You just have to figure out where you want to be, not only with your hands, but also with the rest of your piece. So if the rest of your piece is very simplified, you're going to want to start picking and choosing where the most important details are in the hands. So I pretty much always show the knuckles. I love having this really exaggerated bony look to the hands. That's one of my favorite things to draw, is just really bony, knuckly hands. So that's a detail that I know that I'm pretty much always going to put in. But I can sometimes put detailing on the finger knuckles or the inside of the finger knuckles, as you see that I'm drawing right here. But other times I don't put those details in, especially not in a line work phase. Sometimes I will just delineate that with shadows when it's time to paint it. But those details, they can really add to it, or they can actually take away from the style that you might want. So if you're adding a lot of creases and wrinkles in the hands, which is in the reference and it looks like it's there, if you don't have everything else having that same level of detail, it can actually age the hand so that it looks more like it's a hand that belongs to an older character, even if the rest of your character is younger. So So it's all important to start looking at the details and figuring out which ones are important, which ones are less important, and which things need to be completely removed to have that final look that you want. And one thing that has really helped me get a lot better at hands a lot quicker is I've tried to be a lot more aware of the mistakes that I make in every single hand. So there tends to be a way that I see hands that is just a little bit off, so that every time I draw it, it has that mistake there. And you can find this with any aspect that you draw. I think as artists, we do fall into certain traps where we start drawing things in a very specifically wrong way. So for hands, I've noticed in the past that I have a habit of making the width of the knuckles much wider than what would be accommodated by the wrist, so that it ends up being this very triangular shape if you follow the lines from the edges of the knuckles down to the wrist, where it should be a lot more of an almost parallel. They should be a pretty even width through the palm rather than a triangular shape. So that's one mistake that I've noticed. I also noticed that I tend to make the palm a little bit longer than it needs to be. That way the fingers end up quite a bit farther away from the thumb and the wrist, and you actually notice that I started doing that on this piece as well, and I also did the thumb a little bit too small as well, which is another problem that I tend to have, is I tend to do the thumb a little bit too small and the fingers a little bit too farther away. So it's really helpful, again, to just always use reference when you're drawing. You're a lot better equipped to be able to see what you need to put in there, but also to see those mistakes and those habits that you have. And the more you notice those, the more when you're drawing without references, you see that you're able to counteract it and fix it and change it and make it correct, rather than always falling into that trap. So I really suggest that to always use reference, but also to look back at your old pieces and see how you actually interpreted the hand, and to analyze that in a very separate way of looking at it. Because we tend to see things in a very specific way when we've been looking at that piece for a really long time. But when you look at it after a while and you look back at it, it's a lot easier to see those little mistakes that you have, and especially to see them repeating. So when it comes time to coloring hands, I love putting a lot of extra red on the fingertips. If you look at your own hand, you'll notice that there's certain areas that you see a little bit more of that blood color coming through, where there's a little bit more blood and the skin is a little bit thinner, and that just gives it a lot more life when you're painting it. I also like to emphasize where the bones are. I love drawing bones. I like having kind of like the see-through bone look anyways. So like I said earlier, where I really like showing the joints and the knuckles, I also like to exaggerate where there are dips and peaks from those bones coming through in the shadows and the highlights as I'm painting my skin and my hands. And then finally, I love looking for extra details that I can add to the hands to help tell the story and characterize who they belong to. Like I said, hands can tell so much of a story and have so much emotion to them. They're actually one of the places that the eye naturally gravitates towards when we're looking at pieces of art. Oftentimes you'll look right at the face first and then the hands second. That's actually been proven, which I think is really interesting. And it can help you focus on where you want the focal point of your pieces to be. But anyways, I like looking for details that I can add to the hands that will tell who that character is. So some of those extra details that I sometimes like to include, I like to include scratches or cuts, stitches. Tattoos are one of my favorite things to include in hands. Band-aids, rings, other kinds of jewelry. There are just so many different things you can add to it, or even have like animals or insects on the hands, or ribbons, or there's just so many ways that you can add a little bit more to it and a little bit more interest. And that's honestly one of my favorite things to think about, is how can I just further what I've drawn, make it even more my own. And finally, I just have a little shot of a lot of different hands that I've drawn over time. You can really tell which ones I spent more time on and also drew bigger, and the ones that tend to be faster and smaller are usually the ones that I'm less happy with. But I put kind of a range here so you can see that there is a lot of variation when it comes to being able to actually show the detail in hands, but still have it in this style that I like to have it. So there's a certain set of flow and details that I pretty much always put in there, and then there's other details that will show up specifically for that piece or for that character. I would love to hear from you guys down in the comments. What are things that you like to put in the style of your artwork? What are things that you struggle with when it comes to drawing hands? I love hearing from other artists about the things that you are excited about and things that you're struggling with. But yes, I do have a link down in the description that'll take you to my Patreon. I do want to give a huge thank you to all of my patrons on Patreon. You guys mean the absolute world to me. It's just amazing that you can come and help support me and the artwork that I do. It really does mean a lot. So again, there's a link down there. There's also a link to my art shop if you want to buy any art goodies. But I think that's about it for today. So I will be back next week with some more art content, but I'll see you guys then.